Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Karen McIver. I am the YouTube dietitian and I help young and middle-aged adults reduce their risk of developing chronic diseases. Today I want to talk about my top 6 nutrition tips for people in their 40s. Now, if you're in your 30s or in your 20s, I've already recorded videos talking about what I would do for those decades, but if you are in your 40s, this is the video for you. My first tip is really for females in their 40s, and that is to get enough calcium. The recommendation for women in their 40s is to be eating 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day, either from food or with the help of supplements. The reason for this recommendation really has a lot to do with our bone density as we age. So, perimenopause and then postmenopause, we see levels of estrogen decline in females. Estrogen and calcium are really related together in regulating how strong our bones stay. Most females in their 40s are still premenopausal. You want to make sure that you're continuing to get your bones as strong as they possibly can be before you hit that perimenopause and menopausal window. So in your 40s, most people know, but it bears repeating, that dairy products are a good source of calcium. So that can be something like cow's milk in your coffee in the morning. It can also be things like yogurt or kefir, which are both fermented dairy products. For folks who have a little bit harder time digesting lactose or have a little bit of sensitivity to lactose, these fermented products, that lactose is already broken down a little bit, and so it can be easier for some folks to digest. Cheese can also be a good source of calcium. Again, some types of cheese are going to have more or less lactose in them. And so if you do have trouble digesting lactose, you may look into various types of cheeses that could work for you. Dairy products also have some other benefits that we'll talk about later in this video as well. Now, if you really can't do dairy, there are some other sources of calcium that are definitely worth mentioning. The first of which is canned fish. So vegans, sorry, this one still won't work for you, but if you just can't do dairy, canned fish like canned tuna, canned salmon, those can be good sources of calcium as well, and they can make a really inexpensive, a really healthy meal add on to the salads or the pastas that you're already eating to get more calcium out of those items than maybe some other proteins that you might choose. Canned fishes are also really having a moment right now, so there are a lot of really cool, really interesting choices beyond just the cans of tuna or maybe the cans of salmon that you are used to in the grocery store. Greens like broccoli, and especially leafy greens like kale or collards, they are also good sources of calcium that are not going to come from animal products. So again, if you're a vegan, leafy greens or greens are going to be a good source of calcium for you to include. They are going to be lower than some other sources like dairy quantities, and so you're going to need to eat a good sized portion of those greens or leafy greens to really get a good hit of calcium, but definitely can be part of the equation of how you get to that 1,000 milligrams per day. Even if you do eat dairy products, leafy greens are a good thing to have in your diet as well. Some other options for calcium are seeds. So things like sesame seeds or chia seeds can be really good additions to salads or smoothies, even make chia pudding for breakfast or dessert. If you're into that, those can be good vegan sources of calcium. They're also a really good source of fiber, which we will talk about later in this video as well. Beans and tofu are 2 other good sources of calcium. They're vegan, they have fiber, so they're really beneficial foods overall, but they can really contribute to that 1,000 milligram calcium goal per day as well. And then finally, you may want to think about fortified foods. So things like breakfast cereals, orange juices, non-dairy milks that they have fortified by adding calcium back into them. Those are going to be good options for people trying to hit their calcium goal as well. Again, we want really strong functional bones in our 40s so that we can keep them as strong as possible as we get into even later adulthood, as we start to age more. Strong bones, reducing our risk for osteoporosis is so important in keeping females in their own homes, functional and able to complete tasks of everyday life. And so we really want to protect our bones. As a dietitian, I'm always going to recommend that you get most of your nutrients from food, but calcium is one place that if you maybe don't eat dairy or you are vegan and you find yourself struggling to hit your calcium goal, a calcium supplement would be something to consider, to think about adding to your diet, because it is such an important nutrient to ensure that you are getting that goal number every day. Now, because men don't have the same concentrations of estrogen and they don't experience those same changes in estrogen levels in later adulthood, they don't have to worry as much about calcium. They tend to have stronger bones. Males tend to not have as high incidence rates of osteoporosis as older women do. But this next tip, number 2, is really for everyone as they age, and that is to ensure that you are eating enough protein. Now, most Americans are eating enough protein to combat deficiency, which is what we call it when you're not eating enough to support the basic functions of your body. So most Americans are getting enough protein for that. However, a lot of research has been finding that Americans don't eat enough protein to support healthy longevity, healthy aging. What we are finding is that older folks do tend to need more protein to ensure that they maintain their muscle mass. So tip number 1 was about maintaining our bone density. Tip number 2, eating enough protein, is to help ensure that we maintain our muscle mass as we get older, which again is an important part of maintaining our functionality and then also maintaining our health and wellness and strength into older adulthood as well. So for both men and women, after our 20s, as we move into our 30s and our 40s especially, it gets more challenging to build muscle. It's not impossible. There was a study that was done in folks who were in their 90s actually, when they were eating enough protein and they were undergoing progressive overload, so a training plan that really focused on resistance training. Even folks in their 90s were able to build muscle. It just gets harder. We get less efficient at doing it as we get into our middle and later adulthood. So in our 40s, again, we want to make sure that we are maintaining, maybe even building new muscle mass. And to do that, we want to make sure that we're eating a higher amount of protein. You don't have to go crazy here and be eating nothing but protein, but what is recommended for healthy aging is 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of your body weight. So there is a little bit of a range there, and it scales up or down if you are a bigger or a smaller person, but typically that is a little bit more than most people are naturally eating in a day. So 0.7 grams of protein for a 150-pound person would be about 105 grams. For a 200-pound person, it would be about 140 grams of protein in a day. And then for a 250-pound person, it would be around 175 grams per day. And then, depending on what you weigh, you can do that calculation of 0.7 all the way up to 1 gram of protein per pound of your body weight. Now, again, as I said, for most people, they're hitting the RDA, or the recommended daily allowance of protein. And that is about 0.36 grams per pound of your body weight. So to hit that healthy aging number, you probably want to be about double or maybe even a little bit higher of what the bare necessity for just basic function is. For most people, that means to hit those protein goal numbers, they do need to put a little bit of thought or a little bit of planning into hitting that protein number. That might mean eating something like Greek yogurt with breakfast or for a snack. We mentioned dairy being a good source of calcium. Low-fat dairy also is a good source of protein. So if you can do dairy, including dairy at some point throughout the day, whether, like I said, that's something like yogurt or cottage cheese, maybe it's something like a whey protein shake after a workout, or having something like a casein protein shake, which is just another form of dairy protein, having that before bed. Those are all options. To hit your protein goals, for a lot of people, I'm also recommending grains that are higher in protein. So for instance, rice is pretty low. It's a carbohydrate, it's a grain, it has some protein, but not a ton. If you typically have rice, if you switch it up for something like quinoa or lentils, or a lentil pasta or quinoa pasta, you're gonna get those protein numbers up. You could add something like beans into your salads. Edamame, which is a form of soybean, is a great addition to a salad. It can also be a great appetizer. Edamame can be, sometimes we see that at restaurants. Those can all be really good ways to increase your protein number in a day. As always, as a registered dietitian, I'm going to recommend lower fat sources of protein. Fats can absolutely be and are a healthy part of our diet, but typically the fats that are more healthy for us are fats that come from plants, as opposed to fats that come from animal meats or dairy, things like that. So yes, we want to make sure that you're hitting your protein number, and meat can be a part of hitting that protein number, but you're going to want to eat lower cuts of meat as opposed to fattier cuts of meat. So I'm not advocating to add a ton of bacon, a ton of breakfast sausage, things like that to your diet. Rather, keep those lean cuts of meat, like, leaner chicken cuts, leaner beef cuts, and get those healthier fats from things like avocados, hummus, nuts, that are healthier. Now, my third tip for people in their 40s is to eat more soy. And the reasons that females should eat more soy and the reasons that males should eat more soy than the typical American is eating are going to be a little bit different, but I believe, based on research, that both American males and females would be benefited by eating more soy more regularly in their diet. For females, cultures that eat more soy tend to have lower incidence of vasomotor symptoms of menopause. What that really means is they have lower incidence or less extreme hot flashes as they enter perimenopause and menopause. Hot flashes can be a real bitch of a symptom. They are the most common complaint by females who are experiencing menopause. And so by starting in your 40s to include a little bit more soy in your diet, you're going to hopefully be reducing risk or reducing your severity of hot flashes when you do get into menopause. Now, part of the reason that soy can help with this, with these hot flashes, with these menopausal symptoms, is because of something called phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are compounds that are from plants, but they look like the hormone estrogen in the body. Old research suggested that maybe because of these phytoestrogens, diets that were high in soy might increase the risk of breast cancer in females and might increase the risk for the development of female characteristics like breasts in males. Newer research has disproven those theories. I don't have a hard and fast number for you, but I did see one study that the amount of soy recommended is about the equivalency of 3 ounces of tofu per day. So you could eat tofu as part of your lunch, as part of dinner, something like that. I've also seen a really good recipe for a silken chocolate mousse that's made from tofu. So could be a nice way to get a healthy dessert. The other thing about tofu for both males and females is that it is a complete protein. So animal proteins contain all 9 of the amino acids that are the essential building blocks of protein. They're called essential because we have to eat them. There are other amino acids, but we can make them in our body. There are 9 that we have to actually eat because we can't make them. Animal products do contain all 9 of these amino acids. Most plants do not contain all 9 of the amino acids. So they are considered incomplete, and you have to pair different plant proteins together. Soy, however, contains all 9 of those amino acids. So soy is one of the plant proteins that is a complete protein. So it's going to give you all the amino acids just like an animal protein would. However, soy is also going to give you some other nutrients that animal proteins can't. First of all, fiber. Tofu, soy products, as I said, they're a plant, and so they're going to bring some fiber with them. Later in this video, we're going to talk about the importance of fiber, but spoiler, most Americans are already not getting enough fiber in their diet, and so eating more soy could also help you eat more fiber. Soy products, unlike animal products, are also not going to contain saturated fat or cholesterol. So females and males who are worried about cardiovascular disease, which is the leading killer of both males and females in the US, they will be best served by eating a low saturated fat diet, and soy can be a good way to get the protein that you need without getting as much of that saturated fat in your diet. So for this reason, I highly recommend eating a little bit more soy. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't have to go vegan, you don't have to go vegetarian, you don't have to stop eating meat, but adding a little bit more soy to your diet can be really beneficial in a number of different ways that can be really helpful to reducing chronic disease risk in your 40s. Okay, tip number 4 for people in their 40s is to hit your fiber goals. I mentioned when I was talking about soy how important fiber is, and I'm going to say it again. Less than 10% of Americans are regularly eating enough fiber. The recommendation for adults is 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. So fiber is the indigestible part of carbohydrates, which means unlike the other parts of carbohydrates or protein or fats, they travel past your small intestine before the body breaks them down. That ability to travel to your large intestine without being broken down is why they are able to help reduce our risk of several chronic diseases. So 1, eating a higher fiber diet can help reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes because they slow down carbohydrate digestion, and so you don't get as much of a spike in insulin, and so you can reduce your risk of insulin resistance, which eventually can lead to type 2 diabetes. So fiber is good for type 2 diabetes prevention. Soluble fiber, which turns into a gel when it gets into your digestive tract, can also soak up cholesterol that is circulating around your body. So eating a higher fiber diet can help reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease because you don't have as much of that cholesterol circulating through your body and causing plaque to build up in your arteries, your veins. So if you're worried about cardiovascular disease, getting enough soluble fiber in your day can be incredibly useful. Fiber is also really useful for cleaning the walls of your large intestine because it is still intact once it gets there. Specifically, insoluble fiber will actually kind of clean out the sides of your digestive tract. And so what that does is it reduces your risk for things like diverticulitis and diverticulosis, which is an incredibly painful digestive disease where you develop little sacs in your large intestine that then become inflamed, and they make it really painful and difficult to eat a lot of different types of food, and so can reduce your risk of diverticulitis, diverticulosis by getting enough fiber in your diet. A high fiber diet can also reduce your risk of colon cancer, which can develop after diverticulitis, diverticulosis, or you may not see symptoms of colon cancer before, but again, eating a high fiber diet can help reduce that risk. Now, if you have heard the term the microbiome, or you hear about gut health, then you have probably heard that keeping our microbiome healthy, keeping our gut healthy, is being linked to all kinds of different chronic diseases, from mental health to physical health, long-term chronic diseases. A lot of that seems to be stemming from the health of our gut and the microorganisms that live in our gut. Now, fiber, because we humans can't actually break it down, it gets into our large intestine. Your large intestine is your gut, same thing. And that fiber is actually food for the microorganisms or your microbiome. And that is good because we want more microorganisms and we want more of the good microorganisms in our gut. And the way that we get more microorganisms all together and more of the good microorganisms is to feed them the food that they like. The food that they like is fiber. Eating a high fiber diet also just tends to help us feel fuller for longer, and so can help reduce how many cravings or how much we are eating in a day, and so can help us keep a steady, healthy body weight as well. As I've mentioned, tons of good reasons to be eating enough fiber. As I said, the goal for adults is 25 to 35 grams per day, and most Americans are getting far less than that. Between 9 and 13 grams of fiber per day is what I usually hear. As I mentioned, fiber is a part of your carbohydrates. So if you're eating a low carb diet, or if you are eating a diet that is high in like sugar, refined white carbohydrates, you are probably in the majority of folks who are not getting enough fiber in it. The foods that tend to be highest in fiber and help us reach our fiber goals are things like oats or oatmeal, whole grains, so things like whole wheat breads, whole wheat pasta, lentils, beans. These are good sources of fiber and foods that we eat enough of in the day that they could really get us to that 25 to 35 grams. Fruits, especially fruits with skins like pears, apples, also raspberries, tend to be quite high in fiber as well. And then vegetables, anything with a hard cell plant wall are also going to be high in fiber. So if you are getting a good mix of grains, maybe some potatoes, some corn, some vegetables, and some fruits across your whole day, that is going to help you reach your fiber goal. I mentioned when I was talking about calcium that that's a really important nutrient. And so if you are not able to hit your calcium goals with food, you might want to supplement. The same goes for fiber. If you are not currently able to eat your way to your fiber goal, then you may want to try something like a psyllium husk supplement. This is something like a Metamucil. They come in powder form that you can mix into water. They make gummies now, so you could take a little gummy treat to get a few grams of your fiber for the day as well to help you hit that 25 to 35 grams. Something that has recently come out in the media is the probiotic sodas, things like Poppy brand sodas are not a good source of fiber, even though they try to sell that in the marketing. Those probiotic beverages are not going to be a really effective way to get you to your fiber goals, but they are lower in sugar than regular soda. And so if you like them, if you can afford them, then certainly you can still include them in your diet. I like them. I drink a Poppy, every once in a while as well. My last tip with fiber is that these are the foods that tend to give us a little bit of gas and a little bit of bloating. So especially if you're not eating a ton of fiber, if you make a big jump to eating, closer to that 25 to 35 grams in a day, and you are not quite used to it, you may feel some gas, some bloating through your midsection a few hours after you have those meals. I highly recommend something like a Beano or a Gas-X. Take that with your meals, and that will just deliver a bit of the enzymes that your stomach already produces or that your body already produces to break down those fibers a little bit faster to help you kind of normalize and skip the gas that, sometimes we just don't want to experience, but we do still want to be hitting our fiber goals. Okay, tip number 5 for your 40s is to watch your sodium intake. Sodium is one of the master regulators of our blood pressure, and I'm going to do a whole video on hypertension or high blood pressure in the next couple of weeks. So if you are worried about that in particular, want to know more detail about hypertension, subscribe to this channel because there is a hypertension video coming for sure. But in short, blood pressure is essentially how much pressure is on your arteries or on your veins that deliver blood and oxygen to the extremities of your body. So how much pressure you're putting on the walls of those tubes, basically, when your heart beats, and then also how much pressure is on those walls between beats of your heart. Now, the harder your heart has to work to pump blood, the worse it is for your heart health. So keeping your blood pressure in normal range, not too high, but also not too low, is really important. If your blood pressure is too low, you could faint. You could go unconscious. So we also don't want to see your blood pressure get too low. So I'm certainly not recommending you don't eat any sodium or any salt. But if you have a family history of cardiovascular disease, if you have a family history of hypertension, or you just want to make sure that you don't get into a risky heart health area, you should be, especially in your 40s, watching how much sodium you're eating, because there are other lifestyle factors, contributing factors to your blood pressure that might be a little bit more difficult to control than how much sodium you're eating. The big one really includes how much stress you're under. So I know in your 40s, this middle age, you maybe have kids, have a job. These two things take a lot of your time. They're very stressful. You have older relatives that you're also taking care of. And so in your 40s, especially, your stress levels tend to be quite high, and you may not be able to change those stress levels easily. And so modifying your sodium intake can do some of the work of offsetting those stress levels on your blood pressure. Most Americans are eating too much sodium because we tend to get a lot of sodium from fast food, frozen meals, commercial baked goods. Those foods tend to put a lot of salt in to either preserve them or to make them taste better, because salt really is a flavor enhancer. And so those meals that are eaten outside of the home, things that you haven't prepared yourself, packaged goods, they just tend to have a lot of sodium in them. And we as Americans tend to eat a lot of those foods. So one big thing I recommend is doing more cooking at home, if you can, if that is feasible, if that is possible for your life situation. You may not have a schedule with work or life or family commitments that allows for you to be eating all of your meals at home, but if you can do a little bit more cooking at home or a little bit more eating foods that are not as processed, that can be really useful in bringing your sodium levels down. I also recommend reaching for seasonings to make your food taste really good, to give your food that extra flavor enhancement that we try to get from salt, from other herbs and seasonings that do not contain sodium. So things like Mrs. Dash. Mrs. Dash is a pretty old brand of salt-free seasonings at this point. They're kind of one of the classic brands, and they have a whole line of different flavors of their salt-free seasoning. So no matter what kind of food you're making, Mrs. Dash probably has a herbs and spice blend that will make your food taste great. I know that Costco and Sam's Club also have kind of a general no salt seasoning that's going to be a blend of herbs and spices that are gonna, make food taste great. And then you might also consider MSG. One nutrition myth is that MSG is dangerous for your health. That has actually been debunked as well. And so MSG can add a lot of rich umami flavor. It tends to be used a lot in things like Asian foods, and it does not contain salt. It does not contain sodium. So it can give you that flavor boost without the sodium that can be detrimental for your heart or your blood pressure. And then one thing we haven't talked about, but again, I'll talk more about in that hypertension video, is that connection with your blood pressure and your kidneys. And then your kidneys are connected to a bunch of other body systems. We want to keep that system healthy and reduce our sodium intake where we can. So I've given you some hard numbers for these other recommendations. The recommendation for sodium intake is less than 2,300 milligrams per day, which is about 1 teaspoon. Again, spread across your whole day. It actually goes farther than you might think. If you have hypertension, high blood pressure, or borderline hypertension, or a family history of heart disease, the recommendation is actually 1,200 milligrams of sodium per day, so even lower. If you are eating out a lot, if you're eating fast food a lot, that is nearly impossible to achieve. Most Americans actually average 3,200 milligrams per day. So, much higher than that recommended level. My last recommendation for folks in their 40s is to maintain your muscle mass. I talked a bit about this when we were talking about protein, because you need to eat enough protein to maintain your muscle mass. But in addition to eating protein, you should be engaging in some type of resistance exercise at least twice a week. Now, that can be body weight bearing exercise, it can be dumbbells, it can be barbells, some types of yoga can be good for this. This can be swimming, there's high intensity, it could be lower intensity, lots of different ways that you can go about engaging in resistance training or load bearing exercise, but you want to make sure in your 40s you are getting that weight training in to maintain your muscle mass. As we age, our muscle mass will naturally decline if we are not exercising it on a regular basis, and it also becomes more difficult to build. And so we want to go into our older adulthood with plenty of muscle mass. We don't want to get to our older adulthood and be trying to build muscle mass so that we can maintain function. You don't need to be a bodybuilder, but you do want to have enough muscle mass that you can complete the tasks of daily living. So getting on and off the toilet by yourself, that's a squat. Picking your groceries up and carrying them in the house, that's a carry. Putting something above your head onto a high shelf or taking it off a high shelf, that's a push or a pull. And so you want to make sure that you can continue to do these things on your own until you are an older adult. You can maintain functionality as you grow older. And the best way to do that is to ensure in your midlife, in your middle age, your younger adulthood, in your 40s, that you are building and maintaining your muscle mass. One thing I said is eating enough protein. You also just need to eat enough calories. Even if you are hitting that 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight recommendation, if you're then not eating enough calories overall, so you're not eating enough carbohydrates, you're not eating enough fats, your body is going to use that protein in other ways. It's not going to use it to maintain muscle mass as well as it would if you were eating enough calories. And so you want to strike that balance between not eating too many calories, not eating too few calories, and filling enough of that daily calorie budget with protein, that when you engage in this weight-bearing exercise, that you can then repair your muscles and maintain your muscle mass so that you can keep on functioning well on your own. This can seem like a lot, but I've tried to point out places in this video where things kind of work together. Dairy foods and tofu, they have protein, they have fiber, they have calcium. Beans have protein and fiber. Vegetables are gonna help you get your fiber goal, but they're also really not high in calories, so they can help you strike that balance of not eating too little or eating too much while they help you stay feeling full. Doing a little planning typically helps you hit both your protein and your fiber goals. Planning tends to mean doing a little bit more eating at home, so you're probably not eating as much sodium. These things do kind of weave together. But if you need help, if you want to work with a dietitian, please reach out and we can come up with a really solid plan that's specific to you and your lifestyle, your needs, your goals. Also, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel for more information about how to reduce your risk of chronic disease.